Hey guys, Cassie here with Sew and Grow Together. Today we are actually going to do a little bit of sewing because I see you. It's January. Holidays are over. Maybe you found room for all the toys. Maybe you haven't. Maybe it's still a little chaotic. But either way, the holidays are over and winter is settling in. And I don't know about you, but I am itching to get my fingers in some really good dirt. It's good. I saw your face right there. That was chocolate cake. My 3-year-old only likes the icing, so I get the cake. I did just wash my hands. I promise. But anyway, let's get to it and figure out some things that we can do to scratch that planting itch in the depths of winter. Hey, and welcome. We are 3 families who come together to help each other grow in our faith, family, homesteading, and whatever else life throws our way. Join us on this journey as we sow and grow together. Let's take a quick trip outside and remind ourselves why we are not spending much time out here right now. Usually we'll find about any excuse to be outside with the animals and in the garden most times of the year. I don't know how it is where you live right now, but here everything is either frozen or very muddy. It's just unpleasant. But we'll go ahead and make sure every day that the animals have food, they have access to water that is not frozen and it's clean. And do a general wellness check. Just keep an eye on their body condition, make sure there's no red flags that we need to pay attention to. Otherwise, these guys are pretty much on their own, hanging out during the winter. But let's go ahead and go back in where it's warm and get our plants started. Let's talk about some of the most common challenges that you might come against as you're trying to start indoor seeds. We're going to look at the soil, water, sprouting, indoor pests, and lighting. Let's start out with our dirt. You can use a potting soil, you can use a seed starting mix. There's a lot of different options. We just had some amended soil outside. Gave me a little bit of a challenge because it was frozen solid when I tried to start this project, which set me back a day, but that's okay. We brought the soil in. It's here behind me in the kitchen, nice and warm. And I got our seed planters filled up with soil, and I watered them. Now I want to water my soil before I plant the seeds. I want my soil to have a good consistency. You don't want it so compacted that the roots will have a hard time penetrating it, but you don't want it so loose that there's a whole bunch of large air pockets. So I watered everything thoroughly and let it drain. If you can pick up the soil and squeeze it and it stays together, you're in good shape. If you squeeze it and a lot of water drains out, you've got it a little bit too wet. You can just mix in some more dry dirt and get it to a better consistency. The problem with water is, especially when you're doing indoor plants, is that it's really easy to overwater. You're not getting the sun and the airflow that they would be getting outside. So it's not going to dry out as quickly, usually. And so if you are watering too much, then you're going to have a problem with mold and with what we're going to talk about here in a minute, pests like fungus gnats. You don't want your seeds, obviously, to dry out because they will shrivel up and die as soon as they sprout. But you do not want to overwater, which can be really the challenge. So we want to keep that top level nice and moist while the seed is sprouting. What we're going to do today for these seed starts is use the paper towel method, where we will plant our seeds and then lay a layer of paper towels over top of it. This works because the seed does not actually need sunlight. In all of these plants, the seed does not need sunlight to sprout. They can sprout in total darkness. Now, once they start to sprout and send up those shoots, we're definitely going to want to uncover them and get them some lighting. But The purpose of the paper towel is to lock in the moisture so that that top layer won't dry out. You probably, in the middle of winter, your air is very dry and that top layer will be the first to dry out, which is right where our seeds are going to be. Also, when we water it, the paper towel will absorb the water and spread it across the paper towel, allowing it to soak in evenly rather than just wherever the water is hitting. So we're going to do that today. Overwatering can cause mold and fungus to grow. It can make a breeding ground for pests like the fungus gnat. It can also keep the oxygen from getting where it needs to in your new starts. And this is just a really delicate balance at the very beginning here. So let's go ahead and talk about sprouting. What would affect the seed's ability to sprout? I just happened to be at the local feed store getting food for our animals, and I saw the New Year's seeds. Seed companies are not allowed to sell seeds from the previous year. So anything starting in January has been collected the year before and is packaged and prepped for sale beginning in January of this year. Seed companies are just starting to get their seeds out there to the stores. You can also buy on a lot of great places online. That does not mean that your seeds are no good after that year. If you still have seeds from last year, plant them. Don't just throw them out because, yes, germination rates may go down. You may not have as many sprouting, but why waste good seeds? And you can just layer them a little more thickly and then thin them out if you need to later on. So don't throw away those old seeds. Keep them. But you will probably have a better germination rate in new seeds. I just grabbed these from the store a few days ago, and we're going to try these out. Another thing that can affect germination is, of course, the water, which is what we have just talked about. And finally, while lighting is not important during germination, when the seed is first sprouting, temperature is. Most seeds prefer a warm room temperature, like 70 to 80 degrees for sprouting. And you'll notice that a lot of people will use a heating pad that is specifically for plants you can put underneath your seed trays, and that just keeps the whole temperature a little warmer. I'm just going to be setting our seed starts in a warm room, even though it has lower lighting, until they sprout. Because after they sprout, temperature becomes less important and lighting becomes more important. So while we are waiting to see what sprouts here, what starts to grow, it will be in one of our bedrooms that stays a very consistent room temperature, whereas the rest of the house can get a little chillier at night. So that's where these guys will live until they start to sprout. All right, so let's talk about the other problem, pests. One of the most common pests that I encounter when I'm growing indoors are those little gnats. They're gross looking. They look really similar to a fruit fly, the very small gnats, but probably if they're growing in your soil and around your potted plants, they're a fungus gnat. While the adults are harmless, they don't bite you, they really don't bother your plant, they do lay eggs in the soil, especially if it's a little too wet or if the soil isn't draining well and it's staying moist for a longer time. So these things will lay eggs, those eggs will hatch, and those larvae, those pupa, they will start eating. They eat organic matter decaying in the soil, and that could be fungus a lot of times, but also the roots of your plants, which means usually in a well-established plant, no big deal. But in a newly sprouted plant, it can be a big deal, and they can really cause some damage to new growth. These adults live only 1 week, but they can lay 300 eggs during that time. The whole life cycle of these gnats are about 3 weeks. One of the easiest things is just to start without them, and then don't overwater so that there isn't an overabundance of moisture and fungus and things like that to even attract them. But oftentimes they come around. So we can kill the adults with things like diatomaceous earth, sprinkling that over it. It will not kill the eggs or things that are living inside the soil. But you could sprinkle it along the top so that those insects that are adults would, when they come in contact with it, eventually die. There are a lot of things you can look at when it comes to organic bug control, and a lot of people have differing opinions on that. I've seen also where people, to prevent it, will use sand, sometimes a layer at the bottom so that they don't get down inside the bottom of the holes where the moisture sets. They can do that too. And then a layer on the top after they've planted their plants. The problem that you'll want to watch out for with sand is if you use just like a generic play sand or anything like that, you'll want to be careful that it's not beach sand, because beach sand has a lot of salt, and then every time you're watering your plant, that's dissolving, and you're essentially watering your plant with salt water, which is not great. So you'll want to be careful if you go that route. But if there's a layer of sand along the top, it will keep the insects from having access to that top layer of soil. And it's really abrasive, especially if you use like a quartz sand that has very sharp edges, microscopic, that the gnats just find very unpleasant, and they don't hang around there much. You can also create gnat traps using apple cider vinegar. And we find this very successful. This particular recipe really successful with fruit flies and those other small gnats. Maybe not as much for the fungus gnats, but it's worth a try. And we use a little bit of apple cider vinegar. And our secret ingredient is also a little sugar to start activating it and increasing the fermentation. And then a little drop of Dawn dish soap, and then some warm water to mix it all together. The apple cider vinegar and the sugar attracts the gnats. The soap traps them, so when they come in contact with the water, then they can't get back out. And the water just allows there to be more liquid there. It's a really great method. You can set this around so that they would go to that instead of straight to your soil. So we will be leaving these traps in various places around our plants as they're growing to try to catch anything that might even get started. Our soil is nice and wet, but not too wet. We've got new seeds, and I'm going to sow these fairly thickly because I do plan on splitting these up into other things as soon as I see the strongest plants and the most successful plants. I will be moving those on to other containers. So this is just a place for them to get a start, and I'm going to spread them pretty thickly. But let's talk about lighting, because that's going to become increasingly important. During this time of year, it's just more challenging. There's not as much light outside, and what we've got available inside is even less. So to start out with, we want to think about the types of plants that we're going to be planting. Things like cilantro, oregano, parsley, lemon balm, chives, dill. Those things don't necessarily need as much light during their life cycles. They can do with a few hours a day of good light. They won't obviously grow as big and strong as they would outside in full sunlight, but they'll make it. We can do it. If you have access to a south-facing window, that's going to give you the most hours of sunlight. So we have a window in the kitchen that faces southwest, and that's just going to have to be the best we've got. If you don't have that kind of lighting or not enough of it, you can always go for grow lights, and there are a variety of them on Amazon that you can buy whole setups where you've got trays with grow lights installed above them, or you can have some clip-on lights. And they're really easy. They don't take a lot of electricity. You can set most of them on a timer so they would come on a certain number of hours a day. They are not going to be as strong as sunlight, but we're going to try to utilize a little bit of both. So how do you know if you need them? As soon as your plants start sprouting, you'll notice one stem come up and then leaves are going to begin to form. When those leaves start forming, you're going to really want to watch how long and stringy that stem is. If there are not a lot of leaves for how long that stem is getting, we call that getting leggy. If the plant is getting leggy, where it's mostly stem and not a lot of leaves, it's reaching for sun because it doesn't have enough lighting. So you're going to want to adjust that. And you can help that by, if you have it in a window, you can rotate the plants once or twice a day so that the light is not just coming from one direction all the time. So they're not reaching just that way to get the sun. And that can help them be a little more well-rounded. But if you do notice that happening where the stem looks too long or weak or white and not as colorful, not as much green, then you know you need to add some light to that. And if you can get the light adjusted, you can grow some healthy plants even if they've had a rough start. Another thing that you're going to want to pay attention to is airflow. You're going to want to put these plants somewhere they're going to receive an appropriate airflow. It's not a place that is secluded or closed in where the air is not moving. That will help with a couple of things. First of all, the moisture will sit and not evaporate as quickly. If there's not as much air movement, you're going to be more likely to have mold issues if the air is not moving, more likely to have gnats and so on. Also, as your sprouts start to grow, they will be stronger if they have some airflow and movement in there. Just think of how they grow outside. They receive sunlight, they receive moisture from the rain, and they also have the wind blowing or insects or animals moving around them. There's some movement going on. You can set up a little fan if you don't have any airflow going on right there. So those are just a few tips for getting started. There's usually something else that will go wrong as you're beginning something like this, especially in your first time. But that is not a reason to give up. I know I am really excited. We love having fresh herbs. We love having fresh greens. It's one thing, I hate going to the store very often. We like to buy what we need at the store and then not have to go back for quite a while. But I can't do that with fresh fruits and vegetables. We try to always have a source of greens for us, for our kids to eat, for salads and different things like that. And I really want it to be in my kitchen and not at the grocery store that I need to go get it. So this is just one way we're going to get started. Today I'm planting cilantro, lettuce, just a salad bowl lettuce, thyme, sage, and basil. Basil we love. Sage we're going to need to be growing some because we've got some pigs that we're going to be using, making our own sausage here soon, and these are some of the herbs that we're going to be needing for that. Cilantro because, man, we really like tacos, make our own salsa, and we use that a lot. And the lettuce so that we can have some greens. These are just reused planters that I bought starts in last year. I labeled them by just writing with a permanent marker because always, always, always label. You'll think you'll remember. You won't. You will not remember what you planted where. Go ahead and label it. I'm all about using wood and things like that for a lot of things, but if you write with a Sharpie on a popsicle stick, I've done it, the writing wears off, the wood can start molding easily. If you have the little plastic labels that you can just stick in the soil or write on the container itself, that is more likely to last for you. So I hope this was helpful. If you have found some really successful tips as you've been planting things in the winter, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. We're always looking to learn new things. If you have a question, drop those in the comments too. We'd love to look into it with you. And if you haven't already, don't forget to like and subscribe and join us as we continue to sow and grow together. Thanks, guys.